Uh, Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're watching us from. My name is Mr. Selfcare. Millions in Africa are silently battling rare diseases. Conditions often misdiagnosed, ignored, or misunderstood. Today, we are breaking the silence, uncovering the hidden crisis, and exploring the urgent path that we can take forward. This conversation could change lives, yours and mine included. I want to welcome everyone to today's important discussion on rare diseases in Africa and the urgent crisis that are affecting many and the urgent or needed action that we need to do to make sure we move forward. So many people are suffering from this problem. So many people are having these conditions, but they have been misdiagnosed or misunderstood because we don't even have enough experts to actually diagnose this disease or to read symptoms and help the patients to understand that actually they are suffering from one of the rare diseases. So today we want to bring information to your community. We want to bring enlightenment. We want to teach society about these rare diseases. Did you know that there are more than 100 rare diseases, that some of which you've even never heard of, some of which even our medical practitioners or the people where you go when we fall sick have not heard of, or even have not experienced? Forget the normal malaria, the common malaria, typhoid that we all know about. There are conditions that if you got it, it will take more than 10 people to look at you and actually finally think or imagine it is one of those rare diseases. So this delay in the diagnosis, these gaps in information about these diseases actually make them more dangerous. These diseases are called rare because maybe they don't affect a big number or a big population in our societies. But when one gets such diseases, mainly they suffer in a very big way, because most of the times the doctors or the offices where we go to do not think in lines of these diseases. So this is not a matter of calling them rare, meaning that actually they are not important. No, they are rare because they don't affect so many people, but those that get it actually suffer terribly. And to help us understand the subject matter of discussion today, we are honored to have the Executive Director of a Rare Disease of Africa Research Center, Mr. Byarugaba Umar, who is going to help us understand, who is going to break down this hard subject matter for you and me to understand. Mr. Umar, you're welcome to our show, and thank you so much for accepting to be with us this morning.
Thank you so much, Mr. Richard. A very good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're watching us from. Like Mr. Richard said, my name is Byarugaba Umar. I'm a medical genetist, a rare disease advocate in Uganda, and executive director, African Rare Disease Research Center. Now, when you talk about rare disease,
Dr. Umar,
yes,
first
please.
of all, what exactly qualifies as a rare disease? And how can we tell what a rare disease is? And what is the burden of rare diseases in Uganda and on the African continent at large?
Yes. Thank you so much, Richard. First of all, I mean, as the name sounds, when we talk about rare disease, the obvious thing someone can imagine is a disease that affects people. But the interesting part about rare disease is that they are not rare at all, because we have over 300 million people across the world that are living with rare diseases. Let me say this again, our dear viewers. 300 million people are battling with rare disease across the world. That number is bigger than malaria, TB, and HIV combined. And yet, those are some of the biggest diseases that we respect have the biggest number of people. But if you compare them with the number that is affecting rare diseases, then you find that you have a staggering big number of people who are struggling with rare conditions. So normally we identify disease as rare if it affects less than 1 in 2,000 people. So different countries have their definitions. It's unfortunate that in Uganda we haven't yet come up with a definition of a rare disease. But generally, if a disease affects fewer than 1 in 2,000 people, it qualifies to be a rare disease. And the basic example you could actually look at is sickle cell anemia. It is the classical example of how debilitating rare diseases can be. However, very important to clarify is that in Uganda, because of the huge number and the high burden of sickle cell, of course, that came through awareness and massive screening and a lot of training to medical professionals in order to recognize and diagnose sickle cell. So it's no longer being recognized as a rare disease, but it is genetic, it is inherited, it lives in families centuries as carriers until two carriers come together and then they give birth to a child who has sickle cell. And if you're watching us, I'm very sure you know of someone or you have seen someone who has lived his entire life struggling with sickle cell. And we use sickle cell just to give you a simple example of what rare diseases contain. And other examples that you could look into includes like the breathing disorders like hemophilia. You probably could have seen someone who, after getting an injury, the blood cannot stop. Most people, if you get an injury, the blood usually stops, after a few seconds. But for them with hemophilia, they bleed until they are hospitalized. And then other examples include things like Duchenne muscular dystrophy. You have seen these, mostly children, especially males. This one affects mostly males. You have seen them in wheelchairs, often labeled as, people living with disability, but most of them are born with a genetic condition known as Duchenne muscular dystrophy that affects their muscles and then makes them unable to walk until things get more complicated. So, when we talk about rare diseases, we are not talking about something that is rare to find. We are talking about diseases that affect a very huge number of people across the world, Africa and Uganda, but mostly undiagnosed. So in Africa, we estimate to have about 70 million people who are living with rare diseases. Now, for Uganda, it's hard to tell the exact number of people because majority of them have not been diagnosed yet. It's only a few who are living with the obvious conditions that have been diagnosed, but majority of them have not been diagnosed. And that is a very problem that we are first of all beginning with. That is where we are trying to engage everyone, engage the policy makers, engage the members of the public, and bring to them attention that so many conditions are living with us without a name. Um, if you're watching us, you probably know of someone who has moved hospitals, who has visited almost every doctor, who has been flown to Nairobi Aga Khan, who has been flown to India, who has done almost every sort of investigation, but even at the end, they couldn't find out the cause of this problem. And the reason why most of these diseases are hard to diagnose is because they are not among the common things that we have been, that we are familiar with. They are among the conditions that are very rare, and eventually, because we have not been so much trained in them, they become extreme. extremely hard to diagnose. Thank you.
Thank you so much, doctor, for that explanation. Does that mean that a disease can be classified as a rare disease today, and next year it loses that title because so many people have been diagnosed with it?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Yes, that is actually what happened with rare diseases. A disease can be rare. For example, if you go to most European countries or in the Western countries, sickle cell is among the rare diseases. But if massive screening happens and then more cases are brought up, then a disease can lose its tag of being rare. But at the end of the day, what is important is that um, these are mostly genetic conditions and affecting very small populations or small members of the community, and that is why most times they are not given a priority, and there is a very huge information gap. So eventually they end up, remaining untalked about and mostly undiagnosed.
Doctor, can you when I was reading about these rare diseases, it came to my notice that actually we may be having more than 100 rare diseases. Can you help our viewers to go through shortly a list of some of the common rare diseases that you've come across, especially in Uganda?
Okay, thank you so much. Now, interesting, you're saying that there could be more than 100 diseases. Uh, Rare diseases are extremely many. Actually, we have over 7,000 distinct rare diseases that have been, diagnosed, that have been, identified. And of course, the big problem is that because there are very many, most of them, even as the medical people, we have never heard about it. And that is why it becomes very hard to diagnose something that we have never heard about. So in Uganda, some of the cases that we have, encountered, of course, they include the ones I've been telling you about, things like Duchenne muscular dystrophy. You see this mostly in young males who are ridden, in wheelchairs, who cannot walk, who can't stand because they are born with a genetic mutation. They include diseases um, like spinal muscular dystrophy. This mostly affects, very young children. You find a child who is about 2 or 3 years, or let's say like 4 years, but he's unable to, to sit down. He's even unable to crawl. You find a child who is just born and is extremely weak, and the family is confused. The family is wondering what exactly happened with this child. Even when they move to different specialists or pediatricians, finding out the diagnosis or the exact cause of these issues becomes very hard. Then others include things like Down syndrome. This one is quite common. Most of you have seen children with Down syndrome. You look at their facial features, looking a little bit strange. You see the eyes a little bit like slit-eyed. Then you see the hair, growing up to, almost up the collar with the neck kind of short. So at least Down syndrome, most people have seen it, and most of our medical practitioners are able to, diagnose. Then we have things like ED, that is epidermolysis bullosa. This is one of the rarest skin rare diseases where children are born with extremely fragile skin. We recently had a very shocking story of one family in Uganda, who was struggling with children who had diagnosed cirrhosis, and it was very strange. It took the family a lot of time before they could actually, find the diagnosis, and then others also include things like even albinism. Albinism, though we don't look at it as a classical disease, but it is a genetic disorder. People with albinism, they are born with a mutation in their, in their genes that makes them unable to produce melanin, and then so they don't have that skin color. And these ones, I mean, you have seen them, everywhere, uh, being born with this albinism, and so many others. They are up to between 7 to 10,000 rare conditions.
Doctor, when we talk about these rare diseases, something comes into my mind. It also tells me that it could be because these are rare diseases, even the experience of our medical professionals working on these diseases could be even rare. Doctor, in your training as an individual, how many times do you come across like clients with rare diseases, or actually doing rotations in hospitals, and you experience these rare disease like these diseases in that category?
Yes, now it is a very huge challenge that in the medical training, priority is given to conditions that affect many people. We have a very old saying uh, where they say that common conditions appear common. And this is how we came up with the zebra as a symbol for rare diseases. And it all came to remind doctors that while we are trying to think that, to prioritize common conditions, there are so many that don't appear as common, and yet they are living with our patients. So in our training, rare diseases or genetic conditions are not usually given a priority. Only except in trainings like me as a medical geneticist. Of course, my area deals with genetics, so at least I had a good exposure to a significant number of genetic conditions. But most of our curriculum, right from clinical medicine to nursing to even medical doctors, there is a very huge gap of rare diseases. They are not really given a priority because of the assumption that they are rare, and that in actual sense, the victims are actually very many.
Wow, to friends listening in right now, you could be experiencing one of these diseases, and there are so many times you've gone to hospitals, and I mean they take off all the samples, they look at your symptoms, and many times they say, oh, idiopathic, we cannot tell. I mean the cause, we cannot tell what is causing, we cannot give it the name. You could be suffering from one of those diseases. Surprisingly, when you move to these other countries like the US and Europe and you got malaria, now here is malaria considered as a rare disease, because I mean a whole year you can meet a doctor that has been working in the medical world for 40 years, but they have never treated a malaria case. And so in such countries, if you got actually malaria, it is easy you will die before even a diagnosis comes out, especially if the disease you're suffering from has a short history or kills you in a few days. Doctor,
Yes.
why are rare diseases often overlooked in the African setting or in Ugandan setting?
Yes, Mr. Richard. Now, there are like about three reasons why rare diseases are underlooked. First
Mm,
of all, we have to understand that priority is given to conditions that affect massive
mm,
number of patients.
mm,
So, because rare diseases affect fragmented patient silos,
mm,
the look at the architecture of rare diseases is that on this side you have 1 million people living with one disease. I'm just giving an example. Like let's say 1 million people living with hypertension. Now on the side of rare diseases, you have this strange mosaic where 1 million patients are living with almost like different diseases. So it becomes very hard for even health systems to address a disease that is so fragmented. Just imagine that you have let's say Ugandans are 45 million people, and then you find that different people are living with extremely different, small group, diseases. So it really becomes extremely hard. You cannot have a uniform preventative measure for rare diseases. But you can have a preventative measure for these other conditions. Like, for example, you could tell people to exercise and reduce their chances of getting hypertension. You could tell people to cut sugars and then reduce chances of diabetes. But there is no one preventative model that you can implement for 7,000 rare diseases. So that one alone becomes a barrier for health systems. Then secondly, rare diseases are extremely unprofitable. I mean, this sounds weird, and anyone would imagine why would the profitability of a disease, of a treatment become a factor? But rare diseases have, unfortunately, the lowest return on investment. That means if any pharmaceutical industry, for example, tries to focus on rare diseases, then most likely it's going to invest in huge amount of money, and that money will never come out. So from an investor perspective, that is a straight no-go area for investors. So I want to bring our attention to our viewers that until 1981, it was I think 83, yes, 1983. That was the time when we had the Orphan Drug Act in the United States of America. Pharmaceutical companies had completely abandoned rare diseases. They were not interested in developing drugs for rare diseases because they would imagine, why should I invest $2 billion to develop a drug for 1,000 people in Uganda? I mean, the math would not add up. So they had totally abandoned rare diseases until this act came and offered a number of incentives, including tax waivers, including like FDA, clearances that are fast tracked, and market incentives. So there are a lot of incentives for companies that would invest in rare diseases. And then after this act, that is how we started having now priority given to rare diseases, and that is how currently we have about 5% of rare diseases having treatment. Members, 95% of rare diseases have no treatment at all. Think about it. 95% of them have no treatment at all. It's only 5% that have treatment. And this only came after this act that was able to, you would literally say that almost like seduced, pharmaceutical companies, to also consider rare diseases. And that is how huge the gap has been. And from there, of course, now we have now had a number of other health, sectors and health authorities, trying to, create more effort and try to create gaps so that rare disease can have treatment. But otherwise, rare diseases have been so largely underlooked because of their difficult model. You can't have one size fits all in rare diseases. Secondly, they are not profitable. If you invest in money, you are sure that that money is going to be lost, and no one will invest in money in a disease that cannot return that money back.
Wow. That means that I actually come to speak about it. There are diseases that if you got it, you literally, the same drug that was used 20 years ago is almost the same drug that they are still using. Diseases like people who have these VDRL diseases, the sexually transmitted infections. That painful injection of, is it benzazine, has been used almost from the time we were born up to today. No modification, no. And now when you explain it, the issue of profitability, it could be that actually no one is interested in even improving the drug because there's fewer customers compared to malaria, which has almost a customer in every home in Uganda or in Africa. So, doctor, this actually speaks a lot in when it comes to humanity and people dealing in healthcare. It means that even if the diseases are not profitable, it doesn't take away the fact that there are people suffering from such diseases. So we need to be more human at all levels. Doctor, how does stigma and misunderstanding impact patients with rare diseases, because there are people who have suffered with these diseases like leprosy, diseases like hemophilia, diseases like sickle cell. Recently, we've had a case of Jaden, the famous Jaden in Uganda having sickle cell, and people are making fun about it. Some people feel people having such diseases is because the parents they did not do something right. Some people think it is witchcraft. And so even the people that have the disease fear to come out. How does stigma and the cultural misunderstanding of actual rare diseases impact uh, patients having such conditions?
Thank you so much, Mr. Richard. Now, uh, from what happens basically is this: anything will either be explained by science or by tradition. So, if any disease fails to be described or explained by the scientists, or if we fail to give a satisfying answer to patients who are living with a condition, then by default, they have to get they have to fetch traditional answers. And most of these traditional answers are normally, are very strange. So because most rare disease victims have moved in hospitals and have not been able to get a definitive answer, usually they tend to be labeled to be, having either supernatural conditions or to be living with spirits. We have seen this in very many cases. Even the case we talked about of the diagnosis, if you search in the monitor of October last year, you're going to find that, story of the Ugandan mom who was looking for, 10 billion street children's red. In search, you're going to find it. But what happened is that because these children were living, with a strange, condition that was not satisfyingly answered by doctors, uh, the community members were looking at it as witchcraft. And it is the same pattern we have seen in many rare conditions because they behave very strangely from the normal. Normally, these families are normally able to, to either have annoyed spirits, and this creates a very extreme stigma for them in society. And this is the gap that we are trying to come in and try to share this information with people that these conditions are genetic, they are not brought about by witchcraft, they don't require people to visit shrines and the traditional doctors for them to be treated. And we hope that with awareness of the community, then this stigma can actually be removed.
Wow, that is very interesting. And to our viewers watching in right now, you can leave your question in the comment section, and Dr. Biarugawa Umar will be answering it. It's quite working with people. I've seen a lot of this diagnosis. I've seen people whose disease cannot be named. And that's why I kept thinking, could there be diseases that we don't know now? When I saw this research institute, I said, "Nah, I think these are people that we should invite." And we are going to have this episode every last Sunday of the week. We want to learn about these rare diseases. We want to understand them. Because it could be that there is only one person who has this disease, or you could be having that disease, but you don't know. Doctor, let's talk about diagnosis now. If these diseases are not known even within the uh, medical fraternity, what are the biggest obstacles now when it comes to diagnosing them, and how eventually do people diagnose them anyway? Is it guesswork? Is it after patients have suffered? How do people diagnose these diseases eventually?
Yes, so I'll begin with the obstacles. The immediate obstacles in diagnosing rare diseases is the information gap.
Mm,
These are conditions that are not known, to almost all of us all, from the policymakers to the medical professionals, the members of the
mm,
public, don't have enough information about this. So that information gap creates the immediate barrier to having these conditions done.
mm,
Secondly, 80% of rare diseases are genetic,
mm,
which means they're either inherited or there is a mutation that happens right from embryogenesis when you are in the mother's womb in the 9 months journey, as the
mm,
says advice, a small genetic mistake happens, and then you're born with a condition. Now, strangely, in Uganda, genetic
Mm,
testing is largely unavailable. We do not
mm,
have a single hospital in Uganda that
mm,
offers genetic testing. We have had, of course, a number of cases, of course, done genetic testing, but these few cases, samples have to be shipped abroad for
mm,
testing. The biggest gap or the biggest barrier is that the testing is unavailable in our medical system, in our hospitals, and even the few that attempt to access these services, they are extremely expensive. It costs about $1,000 to
mm,
have a test, what we call whole exome sequence, that is able to diagnose most of these rare diseases. So $1,000, that is a lot of money for most of Ugandan families to afford.
mm,
So that is the biggest gap. Then you asked about how are they eventually diagnosed.
mm,
Now, rare diseases have classical symptoms. If you look at things like Down syndrome, we might not need to do a test, to diagnose Down syndrome. The physical presentation to any trained medical professional, he is able to diagnose, Down syndrome. And then others have much easier, diagnostic tests. If you look at things like hemophilia or sickle cell, their tests have been simplified that at the end of the day, an affordable test is able to be carried about, and then someone gets an answer. And then others, how they come to be diagnosed, that it all comes back to what we describe as a diagnostic odyssey. Someone goes to hospital, they have, they hope, they think they have an infection, they are given treatment for an infection, then they don't respond. They go to another hospital, they are diagnosed with another condition, and still nothing changes. So after visiting multiple hospitals, now they end up in the hands of a specialist who, when he looks into the journey someone has gone through, then immediately someone understands that, okay, this is not normal. So at least now focus is given now outside the context. So after analyzing, of course, the number of investigation and the clinical presentation, these people finally get uh, a diagnosis of rare disease. But for Uganda's case, a huge number of conditions have not been diagnosed yet.
Uh, Doctor, let me talk about accessibility and the treatment of rare diseases. And if we look at a few that have been diagnosed, how easy is it to get treatment for these diseases? Like you've given example of diseases like hemophilia, you've given disease example sickle cell and other. You said 80% of these are genetical diseases. How easy is it for patients that have luckily been diagnosed to receive this treatment? And in terms of cost, how accessible and how affordable are these treatments?
Thank you so much. Now, when it comes to rare diseases, majority of patients who are living with rare diseases, they are given what we call disease-modifying drugs. Drugs that in Uganda, what you would call kuweza, to modify the symptom, to enable me, to live with my disease. But most of the treatments that are available for rare disease victims, they are not curative. They are not, they are not curative. They are basically to modify and enable someone to, extend more years and also improve the quality of life. But what happens is that with the advance in genetic research, we have curative treatments for quite a number of rare diseases. We have a cure for sickle cell anemia. We have a cure for hemophilia. We have a therapy for muscular dystrophy, Duchenne muscular dystrophy. But the strange part is that these curative drugs, they are abnormally expensive. Uh, Sickle cell has a treatment which we call Casgavy. and it goes for $2 million. Just imagine how many families in Africa can manage a drug that is as expensive as $2 million. Duchenne muscular dystrophy has a drug we call eteplirsen. It goes for about 1 million US dollars, extremely out of reach for most of the families in in Africa. So to be straight, most of the treatments for rare diseases are extremely, they are abnormally expensive. They are out of reach for most of the families that actually need it. And that is why we are calling upon everyone. Don't wait to have a rare disease. Don't wait to have a child who is struggling with a rare disease. Because once you reach at that point, you won't have any help. You won't get out of it. Just a moment, just a second.
We are having an amazing discussion this morning about rare diseases, and the doctor has clearly explained rare diseases. These are diseases that affect fewer people in our society, but when you get, it doesn't mean that they are less dangerous or less aversive or less painful. We are talking about diseases like hemophilia. We are talking about some conditions that are genetic or sickle cell inclusive. They affect a small number of our population, but it doesn't mean they are less important. And so we are having a discussion about this. You could be there and you have a disease, you have symptoms. They have done all the tests. So many people come to my inbox and tell me, doctor, they have taken off blood A, blood B, blood C, and they can't find the problem with my health, but I'm not fine. These are some of the diseases that we are talking about. So if you have any question, please leave it in the comment section as we continue this amazing discussion. Yes, doctor.
Yes, I was still telling you about the for these rare diseases. And we see that most of these drugs, which have been developed, of course, after a lot of efforts, after a lot of outcry, they are still out of reach. So this is the reason why we are calling upon members of the public that once rare disease don't visit often, but the moment they visit, it's very hard to get out of them. So we hope that with your involvement, with your efforts, with your voice, we can raise attention to rare diseases, and we can have these treatments, available at an affordable cost. If you look at Uganda, Uganda is one of the countries that have the highest burden of sickle cell. Over 13% of Ugandans 13% of Ugandans are carriers of sickle cell. So if a tour exists elsewhere at $2 million, then you have no reason to be silent about this. You have to get involved, you have to join efforts with us so that we speak out about this. We engage our medical professionals, we engage our policy makers so that these treatments can finally become affordable. Of course, when we raise up the voices, then we have researchers in Uganda, we have experts, we have research laboratories, and it's just a matter of raising concern. And once the threshold gets high enough, then you're going to find that these drugs can actually be even developed locally, and they will be affordable. Recently, like Mr. Richard talked about this drug of ours, Aiden. Though I mean, he started developed a lot of mixed issues. But I mean, it is true that he was living with a rare condition, and he was looking for money to go for a marrow transplant. And then I find that if we don't raise up these issues and we have these treatments locally developed, then we shall be relying on on outside sources, which are very unaffordable and out of reach for our population.
Uh, yes, Dr. Bialugaba. What role should government and policymakers play in supporting such patients?
Interesting. What role should government do? Like I told you earlier, that rare diseases had no single treatment at all until some of the Western countries came up with an act that that brought pharmaceutical companies, attention and made them develop drugs. It still comes back to our government in Uganda. I must appreciate that our government has not, been silent about this. It has done some efforts. It has put up research facilities like Makerere Biomedical Research Center, which we are in partnership with in the research of rare diseases, and of course other research centers. So some efforts have been made, but the gap still exists that we don't have a recognition for rare disease in Uganda, we actually don't even have something as basic as a definition for rare disease. So if you don't have a definition for a rare disease, then how are you going to know how many patients you have in Uganda? How are you going to quantify the burden in Uganda? How are you going to, to instruct daily medical stores or national medical stores to also prioritize drugs for rare disease victims? So one immediate request that we have to our government or our Minister of Health is recognition, is appreciate the fact that rare disease is a public health challenge that must be tackled with all of our involvement, and that will be the most significant thing. And from once the government recognizes rare diseases as a public health challenge, then now the rest will say itself. Medical professionals will also, spare time and read about rare diseases. Pharmaceutical companies will want to, start importing drugs for rare diseases. Hospitals will start putting up rare disease clinics. We are lucky that after a lot of outcry from patients, we finally had a single rare disease or genetic clinic in Mulago, headed by Dr. Risi, big up her. So once we have recognition from the policymakers, from the government, then other hospitals are going to also duplicate the same, put up small clinics for rare diseases and amplify the diagnostic capacity in the country.
That is quite interesting, and I hope policymakers and stakeholders are watching and listening in to see that we do something about these diseases. And how has research helped to bring more clarity about these diseases? I know you work with an organization that is at the forefront of doing research in these rare diseases. What success stories have you gotten so far, and how has it brought more light and clarity about rare diseases, especially in Uganda?
Yes. Now, in Uganda, rare diseases have been one of the areas that have been unspoken about, and you could literally go to any hospital or any government office or any department, and rare disease would be something that most people would not really have good information about. But through African Rare Disease Research Center and our partners like Makerere Biomedical Research Center, we have been able to raise awareness, to raise a lot of informative, articles and through like placards, engaging the medical fraternity. And at the moment, at least there is some basic information about rare diseases in the medical spaces. Of course, we have had webinars about rare diseases. We recently had, a scientific roundtable at Hotel Africana about rare diseases, where we had, multiple stakeholders from clinical, from laboratory, from Ministry of Health, trying to discuss the space of rare disease in Uganda and what needs to be done. 28th February was World Rare Disease Day, and African Rare Disease Research Center, together with MAC DRC, and then Rotaract, and ISEA Insurance, we were able to hold, I think, Uganda's first rare disease walk like a solidarity walk in Kampala, and it really helped us to raise awareness about rare diseases. So some significant, achievements have been made so far in terms of awareness, and we're hoping that as more people join our efforts, then time is going to come where you could work in any hospital or any doctor, and instead of spending 7 years or 10 years, you could spend at least 1 month, and then you have an answer about your rare disease.
That is quite interesting because right now in this month of March, we've been creating awareness about a certain disease called endometriosis. And you just don't know for how many years women have suffered with this condition called endometriosis simply because the doctors didn't diagnose it, or they knew about it, that it existed, but maybe few of them gave it a thought that actually patients could be suffering because of this condition. So we really appreciate and are proud Africa Rare Disease Research Center for bringing more light and clarity about this, and we look forward to actually having more of these diseases and presentations to you. Doctor, what practical steps can can communities, healthcare professionals, and families take to improve awareness and care of these rare diseases if diagnosed or if actually found out in time?
Yes, what can members of the public, what can healthcare professionals do to spearhead this awareness? Now, it comes back to one thing. Uh, every person that is watching us from today, you have to understand that rare diseases live with us many, many years before they manifest. If tomorrow you go and they diagnose you with a rare disease, don't think it has begun that very time. You have been with it, it has lived in your parents as carriers so many generations until it comes down. This is the change we have had, that most people, when they hear about rare diseases, they hear it always sounds like someone else's problem. They don't appreciate enough that every single person lives with about two, three, mutations for rare diseases. Every person on earth, has, some of these mutations in their bodies, and they normally, exist as carriers. They are normally silent. They are only waiting for you to get a partner who is also having the same mutation, and then a strange disease will appear in your children. So when you appreciate that all of us are victims, all of us are potential victims, anyone can wake up and then a disease start manifesting, and you realize that you have been living with it, then it creates a moral authority that every one of us must share information about rare diseases, must be actively concerned about rare diseases. Because when you don't be concerned about rare diseases, then it's going to come at a point where you are defenseless, where you can do nothing. So you have an opportunity right now to engage every person, to seek information, from the medical professionals, to engage with friends and even share their stories. So one single thing you're going to do is share awareness about rare disease. You might not, of course, explain with a scientific, information, but you can tell a friend that yes, there are conditions that are not spoken about, and one day you could be diagnosed with it. And once you're diagnosed with it, then life can never be the same. So the best time you can do that is now, before it hits. Share the information. Tell a friend that rare diseases exist, and they are very hard to diagnose, and they are rarely spoken about because we assume that the victims are few, and we prioritize the one that affects many people. So in simple terms, share awareness, share the information about rare diseases.
How can people watching in or listening in support advocacy for rare diseases and make a real impact? And what does the hopeful future for rare disease patient look like? Do we have candlelight ahead, or you think their future is doomed?
Yes. One single thing you could do for the advocates of rare diseases is share this hashtag, rare but not alone. It has been the hashtag we are using to create awareness for rare diseases, because while the word is an illusion that signifies something that is extremely rare, the victims are not rare. The victims are very many. The victims are 300 million people across the world. The victims are over millions in Uganda who have not gotten a chance to have a diagnosis. So share this hashtag, rare but not alone. And then eventually the attention will be focused about rare disease. Then for everyone who is watching us, who could be living with a rare condition, if you are out there and you have a child who is living with sickle cell, if you are out there and you have a close relative who is living with undiagnosed condition, I want to bring it to information that we are not sick as as researchers, as sons of the soil in Africa, we are not seated. We are doing every effort possible to make sure that these therapies that are being developed outside, that are costing millions of dollars, can be locally developed at at a fraction of the same amount. We are making every effort possible to make sure that the diagnosis can be enabled around Uganda and Africa. We are making every effort possible to make sure that the 7-year average time that a rare disease patient takes to get a diagnosis is shortened from 7 years to 1 month. So obviously the future is bright. More therapies are in pipeline, and we hope that with your involvement, with you sharing the story, with
We want to thank you for watching this production up to this time. We were about to conclude. Today, our discussion has been short, and we've been talking about the rare diseases in Africa. Now, when we talk about these rare diseases, these are so many diseases. These are like sickle cell, hemophilia, diseases like endometriosis. These are diseases that are affecting people, but unfortunately, people do not know about them. So it makes those people who suffer from these diseases actually die alone or die in silence. You know, if you get malaria, hey, everyone is going to make noise, malaria, and people are going to, but we are talking about diseases that are rare. So I'm here to ask all of you, um, to ask all of you to come on board, to come and we have a discussion about these diseases. Let's come and talk about them. Let's create awareness to people in government. Because just because diseases do not affect as many people as other diseases doesn't mean they don't exist. Let's have plan B, that if a disease surfaced, if a disease happened, if there are people that are suffering quietly with sickle cell, what can we do? If there are diseases, people that are having hemophilia and those other rare diseases, like a doctor said, these diseases are more than 3,000 in nature, but each of them is affecting small population of people. This is like leprosy. So my call is to everyone watching in to join the fight. Because today it could be a neighbor's child that is suffering from such a disease, but tomorrow it could be your child. So the more we come up and put resources, the more we prepare our communities for such diseases, the better we are going to deal with them when they eventually surface in your area. Doctors, we conclude, and the very last one. If there is someone who has something that he feels is a rare disease or something they could call a rare disease after the discussion we've had today, where can they go in Uganda for help? Doctor, can you hear me?
no.
Okay, you can't hear me?
Okay, I can hear you now.
Okay. So my question was, if there is someone that today has watched this program and they think they could be having a rare disease, where can they go?
Yes. If someone is today is watching and uh, he thinks he could be having a rare disease, obviously someone has a disease that he has visited a lot of hospitals and has not been able to get a diagnosis. Uh, it will depend, of course, on where you are. For example, if you are in Uganda, our referral center for all genetic conditions is Murago Genetic Clinic, which runs every Wednesday. So obviously, if you see your medical practitioner or your doctor or your primary health physician, then he should be able to write for you a referral, and that referral can take you to Murago Genetic Clinic, and then from there, uh, you know, genetic testing can be done or further testing can be done, and then you have a diagnosis. And then for those who are living with, they already diagnosed it, most of those diseases, at least they have specific centers. For instance, if you are living with a sickle cell, there are a number of centers for sickle cell where you can go and then you can always have medication. For hemophilia, there are designated centers of hemophilia in a number of hospitals, but mostly that is in Malago Hospital. So the best thing to do is to see your primary health care physician, and then he will give you a referral, and then from there, that referral will take you to the, to the referral centers for rare diseases or for genetic centers, and then from there, more help will be done.
Wow, I really want to thank you for this conversation, Doctor, and for coming out. And to everyone watching, in every last Sunday of a month, we are going to be coming here to talk about some of these rare diseases. And we see, again, the goal of this page and the channel is to create awareness. Now, we don't know who is suffering from a rare disease. We don't know who is going to suffer next. These are genetic diseases, but if a disease is genetic, and we don't create awareness, that means people are not going to screen against it, and that means with increasing marriages, eventually the 10 will become 20, 20 will become 40, 40 will become, and then before it becomes a big challenge. So the earlier we deal with these diseases, the earlier we talk about them, the earlier we help people understand, the better. Dr. Bialugaba, I want to thank you for being with us this morning, and I want to ask you to send your closing remarks as we end this program today.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Richard, and all our viewers who have spared time to join us this morning as we discuss the largely, I would say, ignored, somehow, somehow we choose not to give it attention, and we assume that the big three or the big five are the ones that deserve attention. So as we come to the end of our session, I want to remind you that rare is not rare. Rare diseases affect over 300 million people across the world, and that number is bigger than the big three, bigger than malaria, bigger than HIV, bigger than TB. Go think about it. And we are even asking ourselves, how could diseases affecting such huge number still be called rare? Maybe you might want to come and say we should change the name from rare diseases to something different. But that is the fact of the matter, that the victims are staggeringly many. For Uganda's case, it's a huge gap. Most people have no diagnosis. And as we close up, I want to remind everyone that rare diseases, they live with us many, many years before they manifest. And majority of them, medically we call them recessive, which means they require two carriers. For every time you see a sickle cell child, there were two parents who were living as carriers who had no idea about their carrier status, and then somehow they got together, and then they got shocked with the child who had sickle cell. When you look at hemophilia, there are two parents who lived as hemophilia carriers who had no single idea about about hemophilia, and then suddenly they produce a child who keeps on breeding and breeding and breeding and breeding. The same applies with very many rare diseases. If you go for health checkup today, you'll be shocked that you could be a carrier of a number of rare conditions that you had no idea about. But everything begins with awareness. So today, share this hashtag rare but not alone. Rare is many. In our next session, we are going to be exploring how hemophiliacs in Uganda have been surviving. Uganda has over 4,500 victims of hemophilia. And hemophilia is one disease where you not go to any pharmacy and say, I have my K here, may I have some tablets for hemophilia? They will tell you, please, can you please leave? I mean, we don't know about that, and we don't even stop that for that. But we have over 4,500 people living with that condition. How have they been surviving? How are they navigating a system that is not equipped enough to deal with this condition? So in the next session, join us as we crash a torch in the life of hemophiliacs in Uganda. What are the signs? How do you prevent? How are the treatments? And everything about hemophilia. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Self-Care, for this opportunity to share with the viewers out there about rare diseases. Rare but not alone. See you next session.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us in this critical conversation. Rare diseases may be hidden, but the voices and stories of those affected cannot be ignored. This last 1 hour and 60 minutes, we've learned about the challenges, the gaps in healthcare, and the urgent path or need for awareness, research, and support. Our work has been discussing these diseases. Let's take this knowledge forward. Let's advocate. Let's share. Let's amplify those voices of the minority that are not sleeping or that are suffering from these so-called rare diseases. Doctors put it right that we call them rare, but they affect more than 30 million people worldwide. Just because in your house there is no one suffering from these rare diseases doesn't mean they don't exist. And because 80% of these diseases are genetical in nature, it is just a matter of time that actually one marries in a family that has these diseases and eventually will come into your family. Together we can ensure that no one suffers in silence. If the big majority that are not affected actually come to speak about this. Number one objective of Mr.Selfcare initiative is to create awareness about diseases and preventative measures that we can take as communities, families, but also on an individual level to prevent, to advocate for early treatment, but also to help those that have been affected. Let us start seeing people that are being affected by these rare diseases as very important stakeholders in actually preventing these diseases. That's why every Sunday morning, I come here and host an expert talk about these diseases. Sometimes I bring people that have suffered these diseases to tell us their experience. Just like tonight, we are hosting ladies from Endometriosis Foundation Uganda who are going to come and share their lifestyle, their stories about endometriosis. I ask you to stay informed by being here every single Sunday at 7 a.m., Saturday at 10 a.m., but also on Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. when we talk about HIV and STIs. Let's stay compassionate. But for those that have gotten the disease, let's not judge them. It's not witchcraft. It's not bad luck. It's not that their parents were not careful enough, but it's something beyond their understanding. And the best we can do is to be part of the solutions to the healthcare challenges. Again, my name is Mr. Selfcare from the Selfcare Initiative, and I thank you for taking off some time to be with us this morning. Let's meet tonight at 9 p.m. as we host a group from Endometriosis Foundation of Uganda where they come to talk about women that suffer in silence in one of actually the rare diseases called endometriosis that has led to missed periods, prolonged period, painful periods, but also periods where condition where a woman repeats the period so many times. Until then, stay committed to this page, your #1 healthcare digital platform, whose role is to inform you about healthcare challenges and how to prevent them. Remember, self-care starts with self-love, and there is no healthcare without self-care. Have yourself a blessed Palm Sunday. May God bless you from our small studios in the US. Have yourself a blessed week. God bless you.